Red Kayak, Chapter 23. We did not waste time. Crack of dawn the next morning, we made our way down to the creek, where a thick mist rose above the still, dark waters. A great blue heron squawked at us for making too much noise, and, indignant, took off from a nearby bank as we boarded my father's boat. Miss Amanda's deck was slick with dew. We stepped aboard carefully so as not to slip as we settled our gear on board. Easy now. Remember, this ain't no hot rod, Dad warned, handing me the key. Hot rod. Only my dad would say something like that. I'll be careful, I called back over my shoulder as I went up front to turn the key in the ignition. Once the engine was running, I adjusted the radar controls on board the boat while my father reached over to the dock to cast off the lines. Go ahead, Dad hollered as he tossed the last line into the boat. Leaning into the front window, I looked hard into a port to be sure I was clearing the last piling as we pulled out. Dad went to work getting the grapnel hook ready. He didn't think it was necessary to use the oyster dredger. I was glad because it would have taken a few days and a half to get the contraption hooked up. Dad said if the kayak was still there, we could snare it with the grapnel hook, which was actually an extra anchor he kept on board. It had several pointy flukes on it, so if it caught hold, we could wrap the lines around the machine that act like a high-powered winch to pull in the crab pots and hoist it up that way. I hadn't slept that much, but I was alert and I pumped full of adrenaline. Finding the kayak was getting the truth once and for all, and that was my mission. It didn't matter what kids at school thought or what happened afterwards. It was something I had to do. The motor hummed as we moved out, the only boat on the creek. Heavy gray clouds obscured the sunrise, and a few raindrops already warned us it wasn't going to be a beautiful day. But I didn't care. We needed the rain. It was long overdue, I thought, lifting my eyebrows, just as what I was doing was long overdue. When Dad came forward and took over steering, I went back to sit on the engine box. We entered the Corsica and then went directly to the opposite bank and the opening off of the river where I discovered Ben and where I had spotted the sunken kayak last April. As soon as I saw the rotten pilings jutting out of the water, the events of last April tumbled forward in my mind as my stomach lurched. Backing off on the throttle, Dad carefully maneuvered the boat through the narrow channel along the sandbar. Then he threw the boat in neutral and came back toward me. I stood up the side, staring into the water near the tip of the sandbar. Right there, I said glumly, pointing and already disappointed. That's where I saw the kayak last April. We both leaned over the edge, trying to get a better look. Although it was starting to sprinkle, the water was clear and shallow enough that we could see the sandy bottom, but there was no sign of a kayak, nor any part of it. The feeling in my stomach got worse. I'd always known there was a good possibility that we wouldn't find it. Sure it was here? Dad asked. Positive, I replied. The scowl on my forehead deepened. Why didn't you say something about it last spring? Dad asked. I shook my head. I didn't think it mattered then. My father did not ask why it mattered now. He walked forward to a second set of gear shifts in the back of the boat and moved her up a few feet. Again, both of us peered into the river, but the water was deeper and darker too. We couldn't see a thing. Plus, the rain came harder, churning the surface. Not the best day to be doing this, Dad commented. Please, can we look just a little longer? I begged. Dad sighed. Then he put a foot up on the railing and studied the water. Brady, isn't this the old fishing hole where you and JT and Digger used to come? Place was right smart of fish, if I remember correctly. It is, I acknowledged. Remember, I told you we went swimming here too, on the other side of the sandbar. It drops off big time. Most of that old dock was here then. We could climb up and dive off. While he listened, he rubbed his chin with one hand, the way he does when he's thinking hard on something. This is where she tried to come in, right? Right, I told him. She put Ben on that piling, the one right there, then she got back out and got pulled by the current. Dad nodded. The tides are strong coming in and out of this channel, especially in the spring. You think the kayak went out with the tide then? I asked. Dad stopped rubbing his chin, and he resettled his hat. Not necessarily. I think what you've got here, Brady, is a littoral drift. A literal what? What's that? A littoral drift, he repeated. Look. He took his foot down, pointed beside us, and swept his finger back and forth. Tide's coming in and out this opening here. Push the sand up along the edge, creating a sandbar. But as the waves come around the corner, you get this swirling effect. It creates a backwater eddy, a dimple, if you will. That would be your swimming hole. I'd wager a guess that if the kayak sank anywhere near that sandbar, it got sucked into the hole. Let's drop down a pole and see. Slow down. We've got to we've got to move closer to do that. And I don't want to run aground, Brady. Carefully, we inched the Miss Amanda above the sandbar without beaching her until we were directly above the deep water. Dad set out one anchor so we wouldn't drift and run aground. Then he fetched the pole we'd brought along and slowly lowered it into the water to feel around down below. It didn't take long. Dad hit something right off. Something hard and long. We pulled in the pole and threw out the grapnel hook and watching the attached rope spin from its coil on the boat floor. Whew! Must be 15, 20 feet, Dad declared. He bounced the hook up and down until he felt it catch hold. You ready to start hauling? I'm ready, I said. All right then, let's go. Dad wrapped the line of the bar around the machine that pulls in the crab pots and started moving it slowly. It hummed and made a grating noise. I stood beside my father and waited, holding my breath, until we saw something break through the surface. It was a grill. Somebody's old Weber grill. Must have fallen off the old dock, Dad said. Shoot, I muttered. After hauling in the piece of junk over the side, I kicked it. Can we try again, Dad? A little puzzled, he shrugged anyway. Sure. We heaved the anchor back in. When it landed, Dad pulled it up on the lines a few times until he felt as though he had hooked something else. Again, the machine did its work, but after a minute or so, it ground to a stop. What's wrong? I asked. Dad shook his head. I don't know. Is it too heavy? Shouldn't be, but maybe. If it's the kayak, it could be full of sand. He tried to get the machine started, but no luck. Here, we'll grab the line and we'll haul it in. I stood behind my father, and each of us got a hold of the rope. Then, hand over fist, we pulled. It took all of the strength each of us had, and then some. I was bracing myself to see a dumb tree branch or cement block somebody had tossed in the anchor to buoy up. So when I saw the tip of that dirty red kayak break the surface, I was ready to cry with relief. Look at there, Dad exclaimed. I'll be darned. Finding it was easy. I knew it was meant to be. The kayak started slipping, though. Don't let go! Dad shouted. I jammed my feet against the gunnels and pulled as hard as I could. Hold on, he shouted. With one more tug, Dad was able to reach over the side and catch the opening of the kayak with his hands. I did the same, and the two of us pulled with everything we had. The kayak weighed a ton because it was full of water and covered with slimy sludge, mud, and algae. But we got it up and over the rail. Watch out! Dad hollered. Jumping back, we let it drop heavily inside the boat. We were whipped from the effort. Dad sat on the engine box while I knelt on the floor. I tried to catch my breath, all the time staring at the kayak, which had landed bottom up. Water and sand dropping into Miss Amanda's deck. A tiny crab fell out and skittered into a corner. The steady, gentle rain fell good on my face. The other thing that rain did, it gradually washed away the gunk from the underside of the kayak. In slow motion, right before our eyes, little rivulets of rainwater pushed aside all the slime until we could see, my dad and I, how 3 holes had been drilled into the bottom. Dad didn't say anything at first. He got up, then squatted down beside the kayak, touching 2 of the holes before looking at me. He wore a pained expression I'll never forget. What is this, Brady? He asked. I swallowed hard, and with Dad in front of me, one of his hands resting on the kayak's hull and the rain pouring down, I told him. I told him everything.